Hello there everyone and welcome to Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate for Beginners. My name is David and today we're going to be covering the bow. Like with the previous gunning videos, I'm going to be introducing the concepts of gunning to you all to help cover the mentality shift when transitioning from being a blade master. With that said, the bow can be summarized as a fairly accessible weapon from the outset, which in turn makes it a popular choice for many players, but it is also a fairly complicated weapon to utilize effectively. Within this video I hope to help eliminate the knowledge and mechanic gap for those new players, and also help streamline the jargon, so you get to understand the bow for what it is and how you can ultimately utilize it to great effect. In any case, the bow is a fairly versatile and consistent weapon set. It maintains many of the perks of the bowguns themselves while being much more maneuverable and much faster, making it a suitable weapon set for those players who wish to remain light on their feet and attack from range. As the bow is primarily a ranged weapon, the four principles of gunning are invaluable and therefore important to understand in order to use the weapon effectively. The four principles, for those unfamiliar with them, are preparation, positioning, perception, and planning. Preparation is simply knowing what to bring with you for the given quest, ranging from items such as dash juices or potions to relevant armor skills, as well as the type of bow that you wish to bring. This is important due to the drastic differences in bows that I will be focusing on later in this video. Positioning reflects how well the player can avoid attacks, but also directly affects their damage output. Due to the weapon's speed and maneuverability, the player is fairly light on their feet and can regularly avoid attacks, either by simply circling their target or by evading whenever required. The only real issue to watch out for is to make sure that you have enough stamina available to evade attacks if you ever need to. This is unless you decide to use dash juices, whereby your stamina bar will not deplete even when charging your bow. As the weapon suffers from no recoil and has a fairly quick firing animation, the player is rooted for a lot less time than they would be with other gunning weapons, either through rapid fire mechanics, siege mode, or recoil in general. So it's advised that you constantly keep moving. There's actually very little reason for you to stand still other than to aim, but this can be somewhat alleviated with practice. Perception concerns what the player actually sees and takes notice of. You should be able to judge what your target is currently doing and then predict what they are likely to do after their current action is completed. Closely linked with positioning, it is imperative to anticipate a target's actions, not only for the player to avoid taking damage, but to further increase their own damage output by moving around accordingly and readjusting their position. The weapon's high maneuverability and attack speed are again very useful in preventing the player from being hit here, as the player will have many more opportunities to get out of the way. Learning to gauge the flight path of your arrow will also help you avoid attacks, as you will need to rely less on aiming, meaning you will be routed for even less than what you would be if you were to stand there and manually aim. Planning puts all this information together to form a cohesive strategy for the player going forward. Due to unforeseen circumstances or errors in player judgment, this strategy needs to become very flexible and will often change depending on the scenario that you are currently in. Some environmental impacts that can have an effect on strategy include the current zone size, whether the fight is on land or within the water, the monster's patterns, size, speed, as well as the capabilities of your current bow. For example, water fights are a key detriment to bow users, as their attack range is drastically reduced, forcing them to get closer to their targets and therefore increasing the risk of them getting hit in the process. If you have the option of picking another weapon in these scenarios, I strongly recommend that you do. However, if you do wish to continue using a bow in water fights, then you need to accommodate for this in your strategy and adjust your plan accordingly, so just be careful about that. With the concepts covered, we now need to discuss the bow in particular, and this is when things start to get a little bit complicated for me to explain, so please bear with me. Like with the bowguns, the player has other factors to consider outside of raw, element, or status capabilities. Among these attributes for bows, the player needs to consider the shot types available in relation to their charge level, the shot types level themselves, as well as the available coatings. Arc shot types can also be considered, but in the long run I personally do not use them at G rank, just because they are a bit of a detriment to me as a player, because they're fairly slow, leave me somewhat vulnerable, and contribute to lower DPS overall unless I'm running with a group. Arc shots can be used to apply knockout damage as well as exhaust, which is very useful I imagine, but I just don't think the time invested in applying one of these effects is ultimately useful, at least when playing solo. Instead I could have just been applying straight damage or applying some other status effect that's going to help me out in the long run, but that's my own personal opinion. If you like arc shots, feel free to use them whenever you want. I just do not personally like them. At a basic level, there are 3 different forms of arrow types. Rapid shots are the go-to precision shots that allow the user to do a lot of damage to direct points on their target. This shot type is primarily useful for hitting weak points whenever they can be seen by the player and are universally useful on multiple enemies. Spread shots shoot arrows in a wide cone in front of the player, which are primarily used for applying status effects or causing elemental damage. These shots are less useful when facing smaller targets or whenever the player is on the side of a larger monster that is currently showing a smaller profile, or whenever the player is not further close to their target, as not all of their arrows will likely hit the mark. Pierce shots can potentially do the most damage out of all of the shots if the majority of the target's hit zones come into contact with the arrow. This makes pierce shots primarily effective on larger creatures with several hit zones within close proximity of one another. Likewise, this makes the arrow less useful for smaller targets. When using pierce shots, the player should prioritize hitting as many hit zones as possible. Whatever the weak point is, just hit the most as possible and you will do a fair bit of damage. Regardless of the arrow type you intend to use, there is something called optimal range that you need to pay attention to. Optimal range is the perfect distance you want to be away from your target in order to do the most damage as possible. This is roughly 2 to 3 back hops away from whatever you are intended to hit, so please pay attention to this in order to maximize your damage output. This range is excluded if you are using close combat coatings, whereby you are encouraged to be as close as possible and start smashing the monster in the face. Just be a bit extra careful because you're close to the monster, so that means you're slightly more likely to get hit, so pay attention to that if you decide to use these coatings. The arrow's level will simply influence the damage of that particular shot. The charge level will also influence the damage of these shots, but at a very basic level, the charge level governs the arrow used when the bow is released. To explain this further in a slightly less confusing way, I'm going to have to use a weapon as an example. In this case, I'm going to use Amber Arc Belenga. As we can see, the charge level clearly has an effect on the bow's damage output in general. The higher the charge, the higher the damage per shot, but the longer the charge time. In most cases, the level 4 charge is somewhat equal to the level 3 charge in terms of damage per second due to the time it takes to charge that shot, but this greatly depends upon the shot level available at each charge level. In this case, a rapid level 5 shot at a level 3 charge will most likely outdamage a scatter level 4 shot at a level 4 charge. This is in most cases, but your choice of shot will still depend on the given scenario. If, for instance, it wanted to help put the target to sleep, then we would get much more out of our sleep coatings with a level 4 charge, but in most cases our go-to shot for damage will be the level 3 charge. This is if the player can directly see what they want to hit. If not, then there is some ground to use the level 2 charge of Pierce 3, but that is highly situational. As a general rule of thumb, you will likely utilize the level 3 charge of a bow the majority of the time unless the shot type is undesirable for your needs or if the shot level of the arrow is fairly low, in which case you will use the level 2 or level 4 charges depending on their values and your current circumstances. For example, a rapid shot is almost useless if I cannot hit the desired weak point that I want to. A pierce shot is useless if the target is small or I cannot possibly hit a large amount of hit zones, and spread shots are almost useless if I cannot make the majority of my arrows hit the target. Please bear in mind, however, that this is just one example from one bow, and bow users will likely diversify their arsenal so that they can pick a bow tailored for the needs of a given quest. So don't worry too much about, oh, I need to worry about this and this and that. In these given situations, you will likely have a bow specifically for a desired job. Don't worry about it. Overall, the advantages of the bow include that it's very quick, both in attack speed and in maneuverability. It has a very high consistent damage output because you're constantly moving, constantly charging, and hopefully constantly hitting things. It's also very versatile. The use of coats, different uses of bows for different things, makes the versatility of the weapon very high. It has unlimited ammo, so if you're struggling with the ammo capacity and things like that with regular bow guns, pick up a bow, see what it is, and through the arc shot system you can KO and exhaust monsters fairly well if you choose to use them. And finally, like all gunning weapons, reach is pretty much a non-issue for you. You have the issue of optimal range, but it's a ranged weapon, reach is really non-existent to you. You can hit whatever you want, and the plus side of the bow is that you can get in there and cut tails with your melee weapon. It's not really advised because it's fairly difficult to do and more importantly very time consuming. but you can do it nonetheless. There are, however, some stamina concerns. Unless you bring dash juices with you, you are severely handicapped in water. I do have to mention that. You have less defense because you're a gunner, and of course there is that mentality shift from switching from being a blade master to changing it completely and being a gunner, so there's also that to take into consideration. As for the skills you're going to generally want to use, I primarily focus mine to be completely offensive based, but that's because I already have the utility through the speed and maneuverability of the bow by default. The most direct way of increasing your damage output is via normal / pierce / pellet up, which will translate to rapid / pierce / spread up. Focus will dramatically decrease the time it takes for you to reach your charge levels, theoretically increasing your DPS even more, which is always nice. Load up is nice if your third charge level isn't that good, but your fourth one is, so you're gonna need load up to unlock that fourth charge level and then get to using it. It's very nice for that. If a bow you like doesn't come with a specific coating, then you can apply that coating via the armor skills. A common example of this is that the high-end elemental bows don't usually come with power coating, so you can put power coating back on that, increase your damage even more. Finally, I would also like to mention status +1 and +2. These are of course very useful if you're into causing status effects, but be sure to bring combine materials with you and things like that so you can reliably keep applying status effects. So that about wraps up this episode of Monster Hunter 3 Ultimate for Beginners, ladies and gents. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and I hope I helped to somewhat crunch down that information mechanic knowledge gap of the bow. It can be quite intimidating, but to be honest, it seems more complicated when you explain it than when you actually use the weapon. So I recommend you to go out there, use the weapon, and see how it works for yourself. Like I said in the introduction, the weapon itself is fairly easy to use, but is incredibly complicated to explain. But in any case, as I said, hopefully you enjoyed the video, hopefully you got some useful information out of this, and that's about it. I'll catch you later.